The Falchion is a super heavy tank developed in the Horus heresy, specifically to take down Titan-class enemies and other super heavy vehicles. It's equipped with a ginormous twin-linked volcano cannon, and is one of the largest tanks the Space Marines have ever fielded. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Space Marine Falchion, a super heavy tank from the Horus heresy. So, the Falchion comes in at 515 points, so very expensive. It moves 9 inches, so a little slow. At toughness 13, a 2+ save, 24 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 8. So while it is a little slow for a tank, it's so enormous and tough, it's not the end of the world. In terms of ranged weapons, there's the Heavy Bolter, which is sustained hits 1 with 3 attacks that hit on 3s at 36 inch range with strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2, and the twin-linked variant of that gains twin-linked. The Multi-Melta is Melta 2 at 18 inch range with strength 9, AP 4, and damage D6. The Heavy Flamer is Torrent, ignores cover, D6 attacks that auto-hit at 12 inch range with strength 5, AP 1, and damage 1, and the twin-linked version of that gains twin-linked. The Quad Las Cannons are 4 attacks that hit on 3s at 48 inch range with strength 12, AP 3, and damage D6+1. The Laser Destroyers are heavy, 3 attacks that hit on 3s at 36 inch range with strength 14, AP 4, and damage D6+1. The Storm Bolter is Rapid Fire 2 with 2 attacks that hit on 3s at 24 inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. And of course the main event, what we're all here for, is the Twin Falchion Volcano Cannon, which is of course twin-linked with Blast, with D3 plus 1 attacks that hit on 3s at 120 inch range. That's right, this thing has 10 foot range. It's strength 24, AP 5, and damage 12, so this thing will rip just about every vehicle in the game apart very easily, with very little they can do to stop it. In terms of melee weapons, it's just Armored Tracks, which is 6 attacks that hit on 4s at strength 8, AP 0, damage 1. Completely pathetic, but this is a tank, it's not a melee vehicle. And then its ability is the Titan Killer. Each time this model makes a ranged attack with its Twin Falchion Volcano Cannon against a monster or vehicle unit, that attack has devastating wounds. This can be very useful to help bypass things like Knight Lancer's 4+ invulnerable saves, as that's one of the best ways to bypass such a dangerous weapon. Of course, without an invulnerable save, most things will be destroyed in 1 hit, or 2 at best. Of course, being strength 24, its main weapon will wound most things on the game on 2s, though there are a couple things that it will wound on 3s, like Knight Castellans or Knight Tyrants in the Chaos wording. However, given its twin-linked nature, it will still likely wound them anyways, as it's rerolling all wounds. Devastating wounds, you could definitely fish for devastating wounds against things like Cerastus Knight Lancers, just to help bypass that very nasty 4+ invulnerable save. Of course, the rest of the weapons are rather unimpressive in comparison, but that does not mean they're not impressive. The Quad Las Cannons are a solid flurry of weapons, though I'd say they're outperformed by the Laser Destroyer, just because it's strength 14, which is very nice, and the extra AP goes a long way. This is, of course, enough firepower to destroy a lot of tanks on its own, so it's nice to have this thing be able to consistently destroy 2 vehicles per turn with very little issue. Of course, though with its very poor melee, you just want to have a screen to keep this thing out of melee, which is true of most big tanks like this. We are going to move on from the stats and weaponry to the loadout, which is relatively simple for such a giant tank. It is equipped with 2 Quad Las Cannons, a Twin Heavy Bolter, Twin Falchion Volcano Cannon, and Armored Tracks. This model's 2 Quad Las Cannons can be replaced with 2 Laser Destroyers, which I would generally take, as the drop in attacks is more than made up for with the increase in strength. Then, this model's Twin Heavy Bolter can be replaced by 1 Twin Heavy Flamer. I'd say that's mainly of personal preference, though I prefer the range of the Heavy Bolters. And then this model can be equipped with one of the following: 1 Heavy Bolter, 1 Multi-Melta, 1 Heavy Flamer, or 1 Storm Bolter. Personally, I like the Heavy Bolter, as they allow this thing to chip in against Space Marines a little easier. Though, of course, the Multi-Melta is still solid, and the Heavy Flamer is good for clearing hordes, but of course, this thing doesn't really want to be that close to enemies, so I generally prefer the Bolters anyways. But in terms of the Quad Las Cannon versus Laser Destroyers, really, I would say the Laser Destroyers are just significantly better, so I would always bring the Laser Destroyers over the Las Cannons, as the Las Cannons have very little going for them in comparison to the significantly stronger Laser Destroyers, as I mentioned earlier. Moving on, we have the buff options. The Tech Marine and Warp Smith, of course, heals this thing and keeps it healthy, and it's very easy for him to keep up given its sluggish movement, so that's easily no problem, and you should always bring one if you're bringing something this huge. The Primarchs and Abaddon can offer different buffs. Abaddon, of course, gives rerolls, Rabute gives discount stratagems, and the Lion gives mortal wound protection. All generally pretty useful, but I'd say Abaddon is the most useful of the three, followed by Guilliman, as his discounted stratagems can allow for things like free 5+ critical sustained hits, which would be very nice. The Thunderstrike, which is Loyalist only, is mostly pointless, though I still wanted to mention it, as +1 to wound can be useful if facing Knights in a Divergent chapter. Then there is also the Legends datasheet, the Void Shield generator, which I haven't looked in too much to before, but it allows you to have a 4+ invulnerable save, which would make this thing very tough. However, given that you need to remain so close to it to get the benefit, it would be relatively hard to move this thing around, so it would become sort of a stationary turret. Maybe not the best option, but I wanted to mention it, as it would make this thing ridiculously tough, especially in certain detachments, which is the next thing we're going to move on. Starting with, we have Gladius, which of course offers Advance and Shoot, which is handy, though given its enormous range, it's not the biggest deal. It's nice to be able to get the laser destroyers into range faster, and Fallback on Shoot is very useful as well. Iron Storm gives it those rerolls, which is very nice for its auxiliary weapons, and things like 5+ sustained hits, while very pricey, would be insane on something that's threatening. Anvil Siege Force offers heavy on its main weapon, which allows it to hit on 2s innately without any outside buffs. The Laser Destroyers love the +1 to wound, and +5+ sustained is very handy in hitting on 2s. You would generally be able to fish without issues, so you could get up to 8 attacks in theory. Veterans of the Long Wars for the traders gives it those rerolling hits, which is great to make all of these attacks count. Soulforge can give you potential +1 to wound, which is generally matchup dependent, so it is nice to have it on call here without having to dedicate yourself to it earlier. And then Siege Host gives it -1 to wound against things that are a higher strength than it, which makes it weirdly effective against not only itself, but things like Shadow Swords, Hammerheads, Gladiator Lancers, which would all be at -1 to wound against this thing, making it significantly tougher. There are also some Morbsmith enhancements here that would be worth mentioning. In terms of competition, the only one that really comes to mind is the Fellblade, which is a more general-purpose enormous tank, being effectively a Space Marine Baneblade. Its gun is far less apocalyptic, though no doubt still powerful, and it has 2 profiles, both an anti-tank and an anti-infantry profile, so it is useful in more situations. The Falchion is marginally cheaper, but the two are very, very close. They have the same stat line, the same sponson armaments, and things like that. If you just want anti-armor, then this is obviously going to be the better of the 2 tanks, but if you want something that's more flexible at the cost of not being as good as in many situations, then you would generally probably want to take the Fellblade. However, both of these tanks both have their places and are both very good in my opinion, even at their very high points cost. Moving on to their best use, the Falchion is pretty much as simple as a Titanic unit can get. Its enormous Falchion cannon will delete pretty much anything it's pointed at on odds very easily, and even more so with its devastating wounds, as it bypass the only way to stop it, which is with invulnerable saves. Its main gun is so powerful, you can pretty easily just turn its sponsons to fire at other things to blow up more medium to even still heavy vehicles, so its laser destroyers will tear up things like Land Raiders very easily. And then, of course, you do still have your couple of tertiary weapons, which personally I like the heavy bolters, as it lets it chip in against infantry, and after this thing has leveled all of your opponent's vehicles, it's nice to have just a little bit of extra weight of firepower that isn't super close up like the heavy flamers. The Multi-Melta, in my opinion, is just overkill, as this thing is already so good at destroying tanks, it really doesn't need the help. I will say, of course, you will need to bring a screen for this thing, as it doesn't want to be getting bogged down in combat, as it's not good there, but that's kind of a given with any giant tank. It is very tough, and there are certain weapons that will threaten it, again, railguns, gladiator lancers, though in return, they are very much liable to get outranged and exploded very easily by this thing, or even just if they get unlucky enough to have this thing get the jump on them, those laser destroyers will make short work of any tank of that weight class, even before we get to the Falchion cannon, which will so easily destroy them, it's not even funny. Of course, you will want to bring a screen of something like Intercessors or maybe Outriders, since they're a little faster, they can ride in front. You will want to keep this thing out of combat. It'll be very difficult to bog it down, so just bring along a Tech Marine and make your opponent weep at ever thinking of bringing something like a Knight to the table, as this thing will turn into a pile of burning slag in an instant. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me what you thought down below in the comment section, and I will see you all next time.